Claire just watched a corridor ahead with a distant gaze. Those machines with giant blades had stopped turning. She could hear heavy footsteps of soldiers approaching. There was nothing she could do to escape. What was the point? She'll be captured in a matter of moments. If she isn't killed in the process, Alex mentioned that although she was special to whatever sick plan was, she couldn't think twice about killing her if necessary. Not to mention at the moment, she didn't have the strength to move. Her eyes refused to move. The innocent blood she had spilled was just a few steps away from where she stood. Although she tried her best not to think about it, her mind insisted on reliving the past moments. She saw her body committing a grave sin, a barbaric action that had gone against everything she had held dear, everything she worked for. Guilt slowly consumed her, spreading through her bones as the blood coursed through her veins. She felt like vomiting, disgusted with herself. She, along with the guilt, the frustration and anger came. Her hands were stained with innocent blood, but it wasn't her who'd be suffering the most. The real culprit was still unpunished. The guards arrived with their rifles pointed in her direction. She didn't move a muscle as they approached. She didn't react when they took their weapons, or when they forced her to stand up. "But we got her, waiting for her orders," one of the men said. She wasn't exactly fluent in Russian. She didn't have much of a command. She did have other languages, but the little she knew, they were right. There was something about new orders. Claire blinked, something about test subjects. There were more people there allowed, of course. She swallowed some saliva. South or southeast? She didn't exactly know. She would be and have to be enough. She focused her mind on something else, trying to completely ignore what just happened a few minutes ago. Her new goal was totally focused. She had to find Neil and anyone else who had been taken from there. However, she was forced to walk outside. She felt her body locked up again. The woman felt her throat close up at the thought of perhaps Alex could control her body again. She didn't show how it worked, but she knew she was infected with something. Something strong enough to be able to control her at certain moments, but too weak to dominate her completely. Claire closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She could only be controlled because of the injuries she had suffered from the creature, which had strengthened the virus in her body. In other words, as long as she didn't suffer any more damage from another infected creature, it probably wouldn't happen again. The woman blinked a few times after she felt weak sunlight touch her face. She had left the scene. A truck and a van were parked in front. She was leaving a different place. There was no longer the view of the sea, just a single dirt road on the plain decorated with few trees on each side of the road. The woman grunted slightly as she was forced to the back of the truck. Her hands were bound by chains. They were sturdier than the previous ones, locked by a paddock. However, just a few steps away was the man with the key. She sat in silence, quickly observing the soldiers standing next to her. 3 men, 2 stood in front of the trunk, and more driving the van up front. She may not be as skilled as Chris, but she knew it, however. She certainly wasn't going to let herself be taken. Not to mention it was a good opportunity for her to find out the real extent of her abilities. What would happen if she didn't hold back? For the first time in years, she was tempted to find out. The woman took a deep breath and closed her eyes, relaxing her body for a few moments. The anger she had before would certainly be welcome at the moment. In one swift moment, the woman entwined the neck of the soldier next to her, and she threw him across before the 2 could even react. She advances towards them and kicks the head of one of the guards against the wall of the truck. The flimsy wall side breaks after Claire sinks with the man's head with her kick, breaking his neck and almost throwing his body out of the vehicle. Without holding back, she entangles with the third soldier's neck with all of her chains and, in one precise movement, breaks his neck with ease. The first man was still alive and disoriented after being down, wanted to get it over with. Claire stepped up on his head, crushing the man's skull and sinking to the metal floor. She blinked briefly and had always known that she could kill a man with her bare hands, but she never really thought it would be so easy. She was stronger than she had imagined. She could crush a skull with a kick. Fuck if she wished for sure she could crush a skull with both hands. She would really wanted to see and wonder how strong she would be if trained with that strength. She didn't know whether to be excited or scared. Shaking her head and after hearing some of her soldiers' voices, feeling the vehicle slow to a stop, she took the keys from the man's tactical vest and took the rifle from his hands, only to realize that it was a semi-automatic shotgun with the magazine extended, a VEPR-12 with a holographic sight. Turning, she pulls the trigger towards the vehicle, killing the two other soldiers in the cab of the truck. Claire grunted slightly as she felt herself being thrown in the side of the truck after lost control. The vehicle ended up colliding with the van that slowed down. The woman gritted her teeth as she felt the vehicle overturn, and her back hit the ground. The deafening noise of the accident only lasted for a short time, until everything fell complete silent, except for two grunts in that van. The woman shook her head and stood up quickly. There were still two more. She once again took the tactical vest for herself, and also a rifle of one of the soldiers and two pistols. She holstered each of her thighs. The pistols were SR-2 UDAV model, recent weapons created for military use. The rifle was an AS valve with the integrated superior, also for military use. There was a laser attached to the side of the holographic sight, and a long magazine and armor-piercing ammo. They were all equipped. She finally picked up a Vitaz teen survival knife, also for military use. The silver blade was shown in the dim light. She also grabbed some ammo and supplies. In total, she could only manage to carry 7 magazines for the rifle and 3 for the shotgun, counting the ones she managed to put in her pockets. For the pistols, she managed to carry 4, 2 for each pistol, apart from the ones already in weapons. She also had 3 small grenades and 2 herbal mixtures. It was more than she was used to carrying. She hoped it was enough. Well, she'd seen Chris carry more than that. With quick steps, she got out of the vehicle and walked towards the van, where she saw the 2 soldiers crawling out of the vehicle. She raised the rifle and shot them both, killing them quickly with the shots before the head. As she lowered her gun, she swallowed some saliva. The urge to vomit still permeated her. She felt weak, but soon ignored the sensations. Her eyes went to the sky as she pointed her arm at the sun. Soon, she turned around after knowing which was south and walked into the forest. Ghost grunted in pain as his senses returned to his body. He left his arm ached badly as he felt the side of his back. It was probably bleeding. The sound of fire evaded his ears as he cursed for softly, and he began to rise from the ground. He propped himself up on his knees and ran his eyes around. He had fallen close to the beach, and there was just a cave in front of him that served as an entrance to the huge hill. The agent grunted as he strengthened his posture and looked up. A city, abandoned with the state of the buildings. He shook his head and turned around quickly with wide eyes, his mind screaming the name of the little blonde girl. He saw Jill got up further ahead, Parker lying not far from the wreckage of the helicopter, and saw Chris help Sherry to her feet. Jill was wounded on the side of her head, blood dripping from her temple. Parker was wounded on the back, a piece of metal stuck above his lower back, but he seemed well enough. Chris had a small piece of metal in his shoulder. On his face, he just worried looked blended with the dirt. Ghost approached at a fast pace when he saw Sherry was also injured. There was a metal pipe stuck in her thigh. Blood was trickling down from the side of her neck, and she was screaming in pain. Sherry, breathe, okay? Stay calm. I'm gonna have to take this out of your leg, okay? We know what it's like, okay? Chris said in a concerned tone, watching the girl sway with a certain frenzy. Redfield then looked over to where Jill was, somewhat relieved to see that she was getting up. Apparently okay. Then he looks at Ghost, and his expression became a little more serious as the two men stared at each other. The masked agent understands the reasoning of the other man's hesitation. He already knows, Sherry managed to say, between gritted her teeth, and after a few more seconds, the two of them stopped staring at each other. Chris shook his head and shifted his focus on the middle bar on the girl's leg. Holy shit, is everyone okay? Parker asked between grunts of pain, slightly bent over as he walks at a slow pace towards him. His eyes focused on Sherry. Ah, shit. I'll pull on free, Chris said, gripping the bar with both hands and straightening up. 1, 2, 3. He pulls the bar in a swift movement. as Sherry grunts loudly in pain as she feels the object being removed with certain brutality. Blood drips from her wound, and Chris throws the metal bar aside, his gaze focused on the girl. "What? Chris, you have to clean and stop the—" He interrupted his own speech when he saw the wound had stopped bleeding, and his eyes widened in disbelief as he saw the wound magically heal in front of his eyes. "What the—" Chris sighed deeply and stood up suddenly, walking briskly towards Parker. "Parker, this stays between us, understand?" he said in a serious tone, and Parker blinked a few times, bewildered. "What?" "It stays a secret. It goes to the grave. Got it?" he asked once again, not just talking to Parker, but to Ghost as well. The agent for his part just shook his head. Parker then stared at Chris for a few moments, until he switched his gaze between Sherry and the man in front of him, startled to see the girl already standing as if something had happened. "Alright. Fuck, okay," he said, still disoriented, and Chris walked away, not very happy, but it would have to do. "Right, we have to take care of those wounds," Chris said, observing his surroundings. "Our fall must surely be attracting attention. Let's get to that cave," he said, watching the small group begin to leave. "We can't stay long. The crash wasn't an accident. Someone was watching us. They've disabled the helicopter system. Whoever or whatever is coming, they knew the cave is certainly the like place will be," Ghost said, walking behind, protecting the rear. Chris didn't reply, but nodded in agreement. They entered the cave, realizing that they were going to be a long way. With a small rise ahead, just above the railing was an open iron door. There were bodies lying there, bodies the size of wolves, but with a strange physiognomy. The legs were boar legs, the body was covered in torn clothes stained with blood, scars and pieces of metal stuck to its back, its head slightly elonged, with every little flesh showing underneath. The eyes were small, deep set, making it look as if the creature had no eyes than when seen from a distance. Whatever it was, it showed signs of extreme torture. Chris signaled for them to stop, walking a few meters away from the bodies. Ghost then walked over and stand next to the man, and the two stood in silence for a few moments, watching. "What do you think?" Chris asked after a few moments of silence, and Ghost held back from making a proactive comment. "I don't see the blood on the ground. Either way, they are dead before they're thrown here, or they're still alive. I advise shooting them," Ghost said, and Chris looked back, signaling to Parker to guard the rear. The two men raised their silenced rifles, Ghost to the left, Chris to the right. They fired at the almost same time, clear shots to the head. The creatures roared loudly as they struggled. Their bodies contorted and swelled as if they were going to explode. Their skeletal snouts reached out in a bizarre way, revealing a wide mouth underneath that decorated with the human teeth. The roar woke up the others, who got up and started running quickly towards them. "Hold your position," Ghost said, kneeling down for a better accuracy and firing the small horde of creatures. Despite their grotesque appearance, they weren't so very hostile creatures. They were easy to kill. They were fast but not very tough. They probably relied on numbers rather than individual strength. In a few moments the creatures were dead. Ghost got up and reloaded his gun. "Let's go," Chris said, and they were off. Walking up to the cave, the place looked abandoned. There were lamps connected to power cables on the walls. Some of them were destroyed. After a few minutes of walking, they had reached the entrance or exit of the cave. They arrived in a small open area, and while two trees are on the left, next to a small wooden hut, clearly abandoned by the state, it was almost falling apart. To the right there was just a small chasm, a drop that had led to a destroyed part of what appeared to be a long-abandoned laboratory. In front of them, a bridge led to one of the city entrances. "I think we could stay here for a few minutes," Ghost said, cracking his bones in his neck. He turned and watched Parker put his rifle down, grunting slightly in pain from the piece of metal stuck in his back. "Sherry, can you help Parker?" Jill asked softly to the girl, who nodded and watched the woman walk over towards Chris. The two of them could deny as much as they wanted to public, but she knew they had liked each other. As she walked towards Parker, briefly noticed Ghost leaning against the wall next to the cave entrance. His arm was bleeding, but apart from what, he looked fine. "Here, let me help you with that," she offered, placing her small backpack on the ground next to the man. "Thanks, girl," he thanked her, a little breathlessly. "You have to pull it out." "I know, and it's gonna suck." He laughed slightly. You could have lied one bit, he said, leaning against the wall, turning onto his back. Okay, just put... He cried out in pain and surprise as he felt the bar being pulled out by all at once. Sherry bit her lower lip, holding back a laugh as she heard the man's curses and set about cleaning the bandages in the wound as possible. When she had finished, she looked at Parker with a small, innocent smile. I don't know if I should thank you or punch you, but since I don't think Chris would like every opinion secondary much, I'd say thank you. You're welcome, she said with a small laugh. Parker snorted slightly and looked at her a little analytically. Look, if I may ask, he began carefully, not quite sure how to proceed, although the girl had a calm face, so perhaps he didn't need to worry. Yes? Do you heal? He asked, with more a statement than a question, really. Yes. How does that even work? Like, can you heal from anything? Sherry sighed slightly and leaned her against the wall of the man. So far, yes. She crossed her arms. Broken bones? Yes. Perforated organs? Pretty much. Diseases? Yep. Wow, that must be pretty cool. She snorted a nasal laugh. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Never get sick of it no matter what. But healing basically any kind of injury. Always feeling healthy. She spoke with a distant voice, something Parker realized. How did it happen? Sherry was silent for a few moments. After a heavy sigh, she took a few steps away. I'm sorry, Parker. It's not that I don't trust you, but this is something I can't tell you. The fewer people who know me, for the better for everyone. She scratched the back of her head, and Parker put a hand on his shoulder, giving her a reassuring smile. It's okay, no problem. I understand. Nothing's normal for people like us, huh? That was all he said before walking towards Chris and Jill, who were talking about something. She just stood there for a while. She stood there for a while watching, deep down had to agree with Parker. Nothing was normal for people like them. Her gaze went to a man not far away. Her body trembled as she realized that he was watching her. He was no threatening, imposing yet so familiar. Spying on other people's conversations, Agent? She asked humorously, and Ghost snorted softly. You weren't exactly trying to keep your conversation secret, he said, crossing his arms and watching the small group ahead. Not that it matters, you already know that anyway, she said, moving a step closer to them, but also watching the rest of the group. What Parker said just now. She blinked a few times in surprise and had started the conversation. What? Not being normal for people like us? Yeah, he's right about that, but things will go back to being normal, sooner or later. She arched an eyebrow, curious. Do you really believe that? She asked. She couldn't help but notice her tone in disbelief. Don't you? I believe that these viruses Umbrella have fucked things up to the point where there's no going back to normal. He looked at her with serious in their eyes. But they will be in the future, the next generation or maybe the one after that. Only one will know what these viruses are capable from history books or websites. That will end, he said, much to a conviction that the girl was almost convinced. Almost. How can you be so sure? Because my organization still exists. What little is it enough to bring us back to our feet? She snorted in oration, not wanting to be rude, but that thought was insane. An organization that can't make much of an impact. We have so far. She looked at him again, a small disbelieving smile disappearing from her lips. Since we come along, we've eliminated a total of 97 bioterrorist organizations, destroyed 2,300 vials that contain samples of the kind of virus. Millions of vaccines have been created for ever-existing virus we know of. He lowered his arms and picked up his rifle again, holding it just in front of his chest. We have names of the corrupt government and count for any convenience in the world. Those who had tried to create an empire of the terror were scared, and the laboratories were shut down, as many of them were killed. When we have dealt with the Weskers and Umbrella, I'm going after the corrupt. And if that ends in peace, it will end in fear, he said, without blinking, as he looked deep into Sherry's eyes, who said nothing. He mean it, and maybe, just maybe, he would really do it? Come on, we've been here long enough, he said, breaking eye contact and walking towards the group. Sherry then stood at his back while still in no nadation. His eyes, she knew him for sure. She had no doubt, but she had no idea where or how she knew him. All she knew is that the scene was somewhat familiar. With his short steps, he walked towards them. They walked alongside the bridge, adjusting her equipment once more before getting into position. As they walked, however, they widened their eyes and felt goosebumps rise on their skin, and as soon as they heard a loud, high-pitched roar that was fast approaching, the huge shadow formed on the ground, and the group's eyes went up to the sky. They saw a huge creature flying towards them, as fast as a hawk going for the kill. The creature looked at the enormous bat. It had 4 wings and it had long arms, 2 to be on its back. Just above the large scorpion-like tail, there were balls of pus that seemed to pulsate. The creature roared again and divided. "Aw, shit, we gotta go!" Chris shouted, taking the lead and firing at the creature. Ghost did the same, waiting for the others to pass him. However, the creature was too fast and crashed into the point after Sherry and Jill jumped to the side, both women falling to the ground. The creature roared as the ground cracked from the impact. The bridge was going to give away. Parker helped Jill to her feet, and Ghost ran towards Sherry. He put his rifle on his back and picked up the Desert Eagle, firing at the close range of the creature, which staggered and backwards and choked a roar. "Are you okay?" he asked, sounding a little more worried than he had fought. Before the girl could answer, however, they grunted as they felt the ground sink. Parker and Jill jumped away a few moments before the bridge gave away, sending Ghost and Sherry and the creature tumbling down the bridge. Sherry fell into the wreckage of an old abandoned laboratory, into a long-forgotten room with beds strewn about, old and some destroyed. Ghost held on to the creature and used it as a cushion in his fall. As he fell down into the deep passage of the sea, probably flowed years ago. He grunted in pain as he felt the impact, but recovered quickly after drinking a mixture of herbs. He had taken some extra with him, so he could use it as a little more deliberately. In his eyes had focused on the laboratory a few meters above, and then on the worried faces on the groups, meters away from the laboratory. "You guys okay? Sherry, are you okay?" He heard them saying, shouting from above, and felt a pang of relief when he saw Sherry stand up and lean on the destroyed wall. But before they could say anything else, another roar, similar to the previous one, caught their attention. There was another. "Oh shit, we can't stay here!" Parker shouted, and Chris gritted his teeth and stared down at Sherry. "We can't go up through here. I'll meet you at the city," Sherry shouted worriedly, staring into Chris's nervous eyes. The two had stared at each other for a moment, as if communicating mentally. After a while, Chris nodded. "We'll meet up by the radio. We'll launch the flare as soon as we find a safe place," Chris said, and Sherry nodded in understanding, then faced Ghost, who both men nodded to each other. He ran up towards the town while they shot gaze at the creature. Sherry gasped a few times and saw turn his gaze downwards, watching Ghost shoot at the creature a few more times. "Ghost!" she called after him. "You heard him, Sherry. Get out of there. I'll meet you later," he shouted, dodging an attack from the creature's huge tail, which would have certainly split him in half. "I know, but don't give me that," he interrupted her, perhaps rudely, but she didn't care. "Look, this isn't some sacrificial bullshit, okay? It's my job. It's what I do for a living. So get out of here. I'll meet you later." The girl rolled her eyes. She had more in common with Chris than it seemed. Why did it have to be like this? Just accept the damn help. "Yeah, okay. We'll talk on the radio. You better come," she shouted, before turning and entering the abandoned laboratory. Ghost threw the concussion grenade at the ground and began to walk away. Bats haunted the hearing and could certainly do a fair amount of damage to the thing. "You bet, girl," Ghost said, just before tearing open the tail of the huge beast, sticking a grenade inside.